Hey everyone, this is Mike Kaplan, and you are listening to and or possibly watching on YouTube or somewhere, The Faucet. I am your host of The Faucet. I also am The Faucet, or I flow through The Faucet. Whatever it is, I'm Mike Kaplan. This is The Faucet. I'm the host. Real quick, I would like to read this brief thing for you. I'm excited to announce that I've joined the Creator Accountability Network. CAN is a nonprofit dedicated to reducing harassment and abuse through ethical education and a system of restorative accountability. I joined because I care about the safety and well-being of my community members. If you feel my behavior or content has harmed someone, please report it to CAN, either via the reporting form on their website, creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org, or via their hotline at 617-249-4255. They'll help me make it right and avoid repeating that mistake in the future. CAN also needs volunteers from our communities to help with their work, so if you have skills that you think would be helpful or time and desire to help, please visit their website to find out how you can volunteer. Most importantly, get the word out to other creators who you think would be interested in getting credentialed. Help us build safer communities together. So I'll read a brief thing again towards the end, but for now, enough fun with that. Now for other fun with my guest today, please welcome back to the show, and hello, Leah Renee. Thanks for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me again. And CAN sounds very cool. I haven't heard of it. I will check that out.
Yeah, it is newer and sounds like a positive motivation, and I hope it leads to more people feeling the way that they want and deserve to feel. So you, Leah, you just got back from a trip to the Edinburgh Fringe Fest. We have talked on the show before about all kinds of comedy things, and I would like to bring up an email you sent me at one point discussing things that you might like to discuss, some of which we have already discussed. But here, I think, are some things that are remaining to discuss. So let's see. Here it is, pulling it up. Good podcasting. It's really good. And first, how are you? Let's start with that. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. And yourself?
Thank you. I was asking you to give myself more time to
Oh,
find.
sorry.
No, no need to apologize.
I normally ramble more than that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, how was Edinburgh this year? How did it compare to last year?
It was excellent. Last year, I wanted a lot of stage time, so I did like 75 shows. Not all my show. I did my hour each day, but then I did open spots on, showcases and panel shows. And this year, I decided the old adage of 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So I decided to attend more shows rather than to be in them. And it was life altering. It was great. I also made an effort to spend more time with people rather than running to and fro. And that led to some really helpful conversations and just meeting really creative people. I feel so inspired and excited, and I just want to go back next year so badly.
Very cool. It reminds me of the way that I felt when I first, as a teenager or a preteen, found my summer camp that became like this magical place I would go every summer, where I felt, there was beautiful art happening and, beautiful socializing. And I felt like that's where I learned how to be a social human being in a way that was freer than my school life, for example. And so all year round, I would live, sort of just in anticipation of, it was like the summer was in color and the school year was black and white, or the school year was the beginning of the Matrix and camp was the end of the Matrix, but without any villains fighting. So not that example, but
You didn't find out you were a battery at the end?
Yeah, I did. I mean, well, maybe I'm not at the end yet, but I honestly feel like when I was first going to camp, I couldn't imagine a time when I didn't want to go, when I wouldn't want to go back to camp to be in that environment. And now, as an adult, I do sometimes go and do workshops to, facilitate stand up for teenagers who want to do that. But I don't go all summer for 8 weeks like I thought I would. I was like, I never could have imagined a time when I wouldn't want that. But the good news is I feel like the reason that I don't have that need anymore is I've found, I mean, in stand-up comedy and in my adult life, I've sort of made I've expanded, like the summer camp was
The
inside
whole
me the
year.
whole time.
Yeah.
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 And so
You made camp life.
perhaps that will be something that in your life, it'll be wonderful to go back to Edinburgh, but also to create the things that you love about Edinburgh in, your own life, home, career
It's actually funny you
experience.
would compare it to summer camp because that's how I describe Edinburgh Fringe to people, that it's like summer camp for comedians and boot camp because it can also be very exhausting and taxing, especially when you are doing an hour every day and promoting the show. And depending on how intense your show is, like I actually took every Tuesday off of the Fringe to kind of recoup. And I know that's not normal, but it is kind of normal for comedians to burn out. And so my idea was if I take one day off a week, then I won't burn out and I'll still like it. And it's been fine. I don't think I'll do it next year. I think I'll probably be at a different venue and I won't have the luxury of taking that much time off. I mean, it was 3 days, I think. Yeah, it ended up being 3 days over a month, but yeah, it was
Sure.
lovely.
One day off a week. I wonder if that will ever catch on with larger societal groups. We'll never know. Um, but here's a question. I found the email of previous topics that we might address. Now, you've had a life altering experience being in Edinburgh. Let me know if you don't need the discussion of this topic anymore. But you said you were very interested to hear my thoughts and discuss comedy specials with an arc or intentional storytelling, and also quote rules about how many laughs per minute a special quote should have to be a comedy special. You said, I know Jacqueline Novak talks about this, and in fact, her special is a good example because it's longer than most specials, has an arc, and she is insistent that she is a club comic and On Your Knees has a high density of laughs per minute versus any old one-person show, so to speak, which I agree with. Edinburgh, I feel like, is a place where there definitely are people doing shows that don't have narrative arcs, that don't have through lines. It's not required. There's all kinds of non-storytelling comedy and non-comedy being done there, but there's certainly also a lot of that. And that is what it seems like you are doing or have been wanting to do. Where are you with that question and topic now?
That's a good question. And a new thing that I'm kind of grappling with is I saw Josh Glance's show, Family Man. I saw him 2 years ago when he was there with Vroom Vroom, and I loved it. And maybe I'm just too daft to have picked up on a theme or something he was trying to rip our hearts out with, and I missed it. But it seemed like just a bunch of silliness. In fact, so silly and so inspiring that I wrote a contract to myself right after the show that when I got back, I would be very silly in my stand up and maybe been looking for clowning courses, things like that to kind of get out of my head. And so I really enjoyed his show, but there wasn't like a stinger in it, or some kind of at the end. And it was fine. And it was nominated for the Edinburgh Award. So you don't have to have something like that. However, the shows that do, usually get that award, and the one that won it, Amy Gledhill's, did have like a 1-2 punch in it. So I I think having seen enough shows, I do like a twist at the end. I do like something that makes me feel. Um, I don't know if that gets crapped on though in the States. Like I've this new show that I'm working on. I've been talking with my husband about it, and he is afraid that I will get too soapboxy, and I have that kind of history of being that way. And as I've run some things by him, he's like, I just don't think that's funny, like, and we could talk about Hannah Gadsby. I'm sure that was in the email as well, about Nanette and how some people said it's not comedy, it's a TED Talk. And then other people saying comedy can be anything we want it to be. And I know that's a debate. I have not picked a side for that debate, but the thought occurs to me that's like, I can say anything up here. What do I want to say? And perhaps with my Mormon background, this will be my 3rd hour show and my 4th fringe, coming back for 2025. And the last 2 years, I have done shows where I've talked about Mormonism, but I've done it quietly. I've not invited any reviewers. I didn't have a press kit. I didn't publicize it. I didn't say that any of it was about Mormonism directly, because I wanted to just practice it in the dark, in the quiet, and get a feel for talking about it on stage. And through doing those hours so many times, if the audience is the editor, the audience is asking for Mormonism. It comes up constantly. All the panel shows that I was on, that's all anyone wanted to talk about. I was on a panel show that talked about traveling and being, a comedian doing gigs in different countries. And once I dropped the M bomb, everybody that's all they want me to talk about. And so my husband feels like, is this whole show going to be about Mormonism? Well, like, the Book of Mormon musical won 9 Tonys. Like, it's definitely, it's something people are interested in. And I feel like I'm the only person that can talk about it, certainly from my own perspective. I don't know of any other comedians, female Mormon comedians, that lived their whole life as a Mormon and then switched and have that kind of perspective. And so I don't remember who said this, but I think you've heard it before, that be more of you until you is what they want.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, all of these, the questions and the ideas that you're expressing of, like, first, do people in America crap on this? Do people over there, like, the answer, probably there's people crapping on every version of everything. Like, I mean, you can imagine somebody who's like, it's not the highest art it could possibly be unless it has a through line, or a comedian who's like, it's not the best comedy unless it's just as funny as possible, and it doesn't matter if there's a through line. Like, obviously, I mean, maybe it's not obvious, but to me, you're going to create the only thing that you can, whatever that is. It, like, doesn't matter what the category is. Like, the category can come later. Like, I mean, if you want to write jokes, write jokes. If you want to tell a story, tell a story. But also, I've been reading this book, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Have you read that?
I've listened to 5 or 6 podcasts where he talks about it. So no, I've not, but I've cliff noted it.
There's one page where the only thing on the page it says, I thought of you when I was reading it just a day or two ago. It says, create an environment where you're free to express what you're afraid to express. Or a footnote, in addition, or what your husband is afraid for you to express, which I think is what you have been doing, putting on your shows for the past 2 years, quote, in the dark. Like, that's absolutely the place to, create anything that you want to create it in silliness, create it in seriousness. Absolutely. To your point that you're the only person who can share your experience of, having been a practicing member of that church for decades, for 4 decades or thereabouts, and, raising children, marrying, in, like, doing all of the things that they said you were supposed to do until you decided to determine for yourself what you suppose you are going to do. And I think, I mean, like, of course the whole show could be about Mormonism. And of course, like, even when you have a whole show about one thing, like, there will be moments that are about other things. Like, I really think, I mean, like, obviously the show is about you, whatever you do. I remember Johnny Sun, the cartoonist, once said, and he may not be the first person to say this, but he was the first person I saw say this, that every drawing or every painting, every visual work of art is also a self-portrait.
Yeah.
And so everything is also like your show about something outside of yourself, if you were to do that, would also be a self-portrait. And clearly this is something that's been building up in you. Like, it is like the wealth, the depth of experience that you have with this subject matter and the interest you have in it because of who you are and how it formed who you are, of course, makes tons of sense. So, I mean, the fact that lots of people are interested in it, when you drop the quote unquote M bomb, what a fun name for the show that could be. The
I
M
thought about
bomb.
calling it the M word, but they don't really say the N word over there. So like all my Philly friends are like, oh, that's funny, like the N word. And it's like, I don't think they'll make the
Ah,
connection that it's like a word you're not supposed to say kind of thing.
yeah, but do they not have in the UK the M bomb or the F bomb? I mean,
I think they do. M-bomb kind of sounds like to embalm, like, yeah,
it does sound like that, but when it's written, it
yeah,
won't sound like that. Theoretically, I
yeah.
mean, you get to decide what your show is called and what it's about. I'm not in charge, unless you put me there. But yeah, it's so interesting, the conversation that we've sort of been having, in the past couple days, not recorded, for podcast, about your desires and your goals for the show, for your comedy, for your life, like all of the. I mean, as a comedian, you care. I mean, you care. I hope what you think, what you feel like about what you're doing. Then what audiences potentially, maybe, I don't know what the order is, but the audiences, then your husband, your chosen family, who isn't in the exact same place as you are with respect to all of the things that you may or may not talk about on stage, like in the dark, or perhaps then in the light.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I mean, the good news is, like, everything's in the dark until you turn the light on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been something that I have realized as I talk to people. There is kind of an embarrassment that I feel that it took me so long to unpack some of the logical fallacies of what I was raised in. And I've been surprised at how generous people are, where I'm like, I can't believe it took me this long to be bothered by this, that, kind of things rocks that I looked under, that were there the whole time. And they're always really encouraging, even to the point of like making me kind of teary, where they're like, you left a cult like that. No, that takes huge bravery. And then when people throw out the word cult, I'm like, but it didn't feel like a cult. Like cults seem like dark and scary, and you're like drinking goat's blood and wearing crazy clothes and sleeping with a cult I was like, it doesn't, and I'm trying to express this. I'm like, it's like a cult run by an a cappella group. It's very like innocent and fun, but like an a cappella group and Chase Bank. Like it's very organized and very administrative. Like Mormons are amazing record keepers. And so one of the show titles, in fact, the top show title that I wanted to call it Best Cult Ever, is trying to explain that like it didn't feel like a cult because and the song that I wrote yesterday or the day before that highlights. So like one of them is it's the best cult ever, the funnest cult you'll ever know. It's the best cult ever. I think you'll see the numbers show. And then say, like, the Mormon church has a financial portfolio of over $265 billion. Now, you don't see those kind of numbers from some Kool-Aid drinking Texas cult. Like, that it's like, no, this is like a very successful group of, like, to kind of put it as a cult. But then when I actually looked up what a cult was, I'm like, and people have made this point before that being a Philadelphia Eagles fan is a cult. Or I've made jokes about how like I left one cult but I want to be part of something else, so I joined the Wawa Rewards member club. That we kind of will pick a group because humans are social creatures, we want to feel safe. we want to feel connected. And so there are different groups that would definitely tick the boxes of being a cult, but we wouldn't consider it a cult because there's a negative connotation. And so as I try to explain to people my experience in Mormonism and leaving it, I feel like enumerating all the good things about it. That it's like, no, I stayed in it because, after I had my babies, I would have women come over to my home and clean my bathroom and bring me food and hold my baby so I could take a shower. Like it's very, it never seemed like dark and scary. It always seemed like a generous, wholehearted community of people who truly believed in something and were willing to sacrifice for the good of others. And those were actually the reasons why I started to exit it, because I started to feel less a part of the group when things unfolded in 2020. That there were so many Mormons who refused to mask, that I was like, oh, I thought it was just odd for me that a family would pay $12,000 to have their son volunteer for 2 years in a foreign country to teach them about Mormonism, because it's good to be charitable and to serve other people, but yet they wouldn't wear a mask to not potentially kill someone's grandmother with this disease. That there was this like cognitive dissonance that I started to feel like I don't feel like part of this group. Whereas before, you're willing to overlook facts in order to be a part of the group because the benefit of staying is so much higher than leaving. And so I never wanted to leave it. I never had any desire to leave it. And so perhaps in this, I feel like showing the benefits of being in this group, especially in a time where people feel disconnected, where they feel alone, where they lack structure or ritual or things that help them. And so you see the rise of things like Stoicism. Mormonism has some Stoic elements in it. And it's a good way of living. And part of me is like, kind of like the take a penny, leave a penny. I'm like, I've even thought in the show of like giving out a Book of Mormon. It's like, you know what? I could be wrong. Mormonism might be right. And I don't want to say anything against it that leads people away. So it's like, maybe I give out a Book of Mormon and someone take my spot, that I got out of this relay race. So somebody else wants it. And that's what was interesting to me, because I felt in my shows that it was very clear that I didn't believe in it anymore. But every single show, if I opened it up for questions, and I learned not to do this, sometimes I would leave some time about halfway through when I started talking about Mormonism more, and to say, does anyone have any questions? They all wanted to know if I was still in it. And if I didn't open it up during the show, afterwards, it always turned into a Q&A. They're like, so are you still Mormon? And is your husband still Mormon? They always wanted to know that. And I thought, well, it's clear that I'm not, because I brought up polygamy or, something like that. But it wasn't to them. But anything that's not 100% positive about the church is considered kind of anti-Mormon by devout believers. And so that's why I found it really fascinating, even talking with some of my friends who are active Mormons, and I shared with them the Best Cult Ever song that I'm writing. And they're like, oh, I think it sounds positive. And it's like, just using the C word is going to.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm not a cult researcher, but sort of as a layperson, I just briefly, Googled cult definition. And one of the first definitions is a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. And so that's when you say, like, it didn't feel like it while you were in it. Of course, if it felt dark and scary and sinister and dangerous, like it's why cults are often likened to abusive relationships. Like, not every group is a cult by definition, because otherwise those would be synonymous, and they're not. And not every relationship, not every romantic relationship is an abusive relationship, because we have, sort of definitions and parameters and when a person is in an abusive relationship, from my, sort of anecdotal, again, layperson study and discussion with people who have more experience with these things, sadly, and, curiously than I do. When you're in an abusive relationship, you don't, like, a person might not leave because there are sometimes things about it that are good. Like, I mean, sometimes it's that if it's a woman who's with a man, if maybe she isn't as financially stable as she would need to be to leave. Maybe, of course, she could be in fear for her life, but there are, there's romantic abusive relationships which are not even necessarily like physically harming the person,
Mm-hmm.
but there is, emotional abuse. There is like mental, sort of
Yeah, maybe
isolation.
on a
And
lighter scale, like codependent. And I've heard a lot of my friends that have kind of looked at Mormonism with a critical eye, whether or not they've chosen to stay or leave. But there's a feeling of codependency in it that I could see why people would classify it as a cult, because you'll have meetings where you'll hear the phrase a lot. I don't know where I'd be without the church, or I wouldn't last a day without, like, I need this in my, if I didn't have this in my life. And there's kind of that, and I remember feeling that way too. Oh, if I didn't have the Mormon church, I would be a crack whore. Like, I thought if I left it, I would just go off the rails, be this crazy person.
and just real quick, double checking currently, would you say that is what happened since you left the
I
church?
am a crack whore now. I found the financial benefits to be just unarguably one of the best decisions that I've made.
And so just for everyone listening, to be clear, Leah became a comedian and now doesn't do sex work in exchange for drugs, but makes jokes about
the crack that I do is the Irish form of crack. So when I say a crack whore, it means that
like wisecracking. Yes, of course.
I tell jokes for money.
You're a wisecrack whore. Okay.
Do you know
there's a name
crack?
for your show.
Do you know Irish?
Yeah, I do.
Crack.
I do.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think it is related to wisecracking as well.
Yeah.
Like etymologically, I'm not positive, but I have heard both. Yes.
Yeah, I actually employed the use of AI to. I asked for elements of a cult and then elements of an MLM, because Mormons, maybe surprisingly or not surprisingly, often fall prey to MLMs. And that was something, even as a Mormon, I could never do. I could never get into like essential oils or jamberry nails or herbal life or any of that kind of stuff. And
so you're talking not just the multi-level marketingness of like the potentially the pyramid scheme of the religion to begin with, be like, oh, convert more people and that'll be good for you and people and the world, it'll pay dividends like that. But actually, you said people in the church are into other outside the church multi-level marketing MLMs, situations. Cool.
And I mean, Mormons are very extroverted. In fact, I used to have this conversation with some of my friends who were deeply introverted. Like, do you feel like the gospel requires you to be extroverted? And they said 100%. I knew someone who's very shy and very private and personal who went on a full-time mission. Both he and his brother, same way. One went to Germany and one went to Las Vegas. And I hope that doesn't expose who these people are. Sorry if anyone can figure out who this person is. Anyways, I know someone who had really severe IBS on their mission because it was so troublesome for them to talk to people, to talk to strangers all day long, and not just, hi, can you give $1 to the, Biden campaign, but like talk about Jesus, like the most difficult thing to talk to a stranger about, probably, religion or maybe their finances or something. I don't know what would be more difficult to ask a stranger about, but Mormon men are expected to go on missions. And so the idea is that God will help you through anything. And so, yes, we're kind of required to be extroverted. And as I looked at some of the things that make something an MLM, and then some of the ways that the church is structured, there was definitely an overlap in the Venn diagram. But I never felt that was something I thought was kind of weird when I was a missionary, that they thought that I got some kind of points or kudos for converting people, that there was some sort of, if you can get 5 people baptized, then but there is not. There was never a system, especially like in terms of heaven. It's not like, oh, if you convert at least 5 people on your mission, then you get this spot in heaven. It's never been like that. However, each mission has their own goals and standards. And so they would give you things like how many first discussions you would teach, and you would try to hit those benchmarks, or how many hours of knocking on doors you did. So I felt like it was more about your effort, because at the end of the day, everyone has what we call in the church free agency, or free will. And so to base your goals off of someone else's life choices is a fool's errand and not appropriate. But if you base it off of something you can do, like talk to people, like I can talk to 10 people today, that's something I can do. It might be a very short conversation, it might be a long conversation. So that's why I always felt like, no, I don't get like points for specific numbers of people joining, but definitely there are goals and metrics that like being a missionary is the most probably culty part of being a missionary. Like when I went, you could only talk to your family twice a year on the phone, Mother's Day and Christmas, in like a 30-minute phone call. And that would be considered very like isolating. You always had to be with your missionary companion. You weren't ever even supposed to be out of like eye shot. So even when we went to the grocery store, we'd have to go down the same aisle at the same time. So even if she needed to go get something in one part of the store and I need to go somewhere else, we had to always see each other. So there's a lot of kind of like woo woo, like missionaries can't go in the
That's
water.
like that's like Handmaid's Tale
It,
level.
yeah,
Yeah.
the mission experience is pretty into like, and I'm not really looking to talk about the missionary experience as much because of the Book of Mormon musical just covers it. I think some of the things I'm interested in talking about are like famous Mormons. That's kind of an interesting topic to people. Like the lead singer of the Imagine Dragons is Mormon. Brandon Flowers from the Killers, Marriott, like the Marriott hotels, that guy's Mormon. So just kind of fun, almost like Hanukkah song version for Mormons. I've also considered getting into like purity culture. Also kind of
Isn't it a little late for you to do that? Yeah.
yeah, now that I'm a crack whore, I had to go to both ends, to see where I want to land.
Wow. Okay.
The alcohol phobia as well, that Mormons experience, and while I don't think alcohol is good for people, Mormons are very afraid of it. In fact, this was brought to my attention by a lot of people that there are apparently there's a TikToker who goes around and says, "Would you rather have a sip of alcohol or coffee or something, or kill a puppy?" And a shocking number would rather kill a puppy, because killing a puppy is not against the commandments, but drinking alcohol is. And so it's things
That
like that.
seems imbalanced to me.
Yes. So it's
Uh,
things like that that I want to bring up. But there's also things like Mormons have a lot of generational trauma and kind of persecution complex. Part of it is because in 1838 there was an official extermination order in the state of Missouri where it became legal to kill Mormons, and so they had their own little like microscopic Holocaust where 18 men and boys were murdered, and the murderers
wow.
were never brought to trial, and it led to the expulsion of tens of thousands of Mormons out of the state of Missouri. So it's things like that there's very much an us and them feeling within Mormonism that I wanted to talk about and kind of explain why Mormons are preppers. For example, they settled a desert that was inhospitable, but they, through their sheer grit and work ethic, they made, as there's a scripture in Isaiah that says, the desert shall blossom as a rose. And there are 16 million people in the world that think that scripture is a prophecy of Mormons settling the Wasatch Valley in Utah. So,
Sure. Here's first a couple ideas for other titles: multi-level Mormoning and Mormon-level marketing.
I love it.
ML Mormon or Mormon LM. Something going back to something you said earlier when you were talking about uh, not having realized the logical fallacies earlier, and that people have been generous and gracious and understanding of the fact that you were in this cult or cult-like situation. I mean, also we all like most humans, if not all humans, have something like that happening where like even, I am an American citizen, and there was a time when I did not know like where all my tax dollars went or where the tax dollars went. And like, a lot of them go to the military, and a lot of things that our military does, there are innocent children killed, that our tax dollars pay for. And like America is not a cult that is easily left. I mean, because then also, where do you go? There's
Mm.
a comedian named Barry Crimmins who died a few years back, and he was incredible. There's a movie about him. I believe it's called Call Me Lucky, a documentary about his life. And one of his jokes, I think one of his most famous jokes, he was a political comedian, and he would say something, I'm paraphrasing, something he would say like, people always ask me, like, you're so critical of the United States. If you don't like it so much, like, why don't you go live somewhere else? And he's like, what if you don't America, you don't live in America, you don't like America, why don't you move somewhere else? He's like, because I don't want to be victimized by its foreign policy.
Mm.
Like there's nowhere, in this life, while we live on a planet of, countries and societies, with other human beings, like more connected now
You
than
can't get
ever
away from it.
before.
Just moving doesn't, yeah, protect you from.
Right. And so we all make decisions about like, what we do. Like if you live in the United States and you don't, you can not choose not to go to war if you want to be a conscientious objector. If you were drafted, you can protest, you can, lobby Congress you could try to vote for people who will implement less harmful policies or whatever we'd like them to do. And so I don't know if there's any Mormons who stay in the church to try to change it from the inside, because I'm
Yeah.
sure
They're
there are ways that it's better today than it was 100 years ago. And also, it's very reasonable for you to have made the decision you made when you're like, it seems like we should be caring for other people in this worldwide pandemic, in a way, and you chose to live a way that seemed more caring and more, listening to a community of scientists, among other people, about like the best and most caring way to live, and that did not, align.
Well, that, I mean, honestly, was one of the reasons that I left. There was a big campaign a couple of years ago where the prophet of the Mormon church and the 12 apostles had this campaign called Hear Him. And it was one of the things Mormons like to pride themselves on is this idea of direct revelation, that you don't need a saint or somebody in between, that you can talk directly to God and God can communicate to you. And so, as I found out some unsavory things about, for example, the way polygamy was instituted and practiced. I knew that polygamy existed. It doesn't exist now. And there are a lot of justifications given of, it was this fledgling church and there's more women than men in the church. And at that time, women needed to be married. And so it was a way for women to be protected. And it was a way for people to have more children to help grow the church. And Mormons believe that marriage is an essential covenant, or like in the Catholic Church might be considered a sacrament. And so if everyone has to be married to go to heaven and there's more women than men, then of course polygamy is going to exist. And so I didn't dig very deep on it. But then when I found out that Joseph Smith married people that were already married and like sent their husbands on missions to England and then married them secretly, well, I was like, well, I don't know, or teenage girls that were sisters that were, like, I think they have time to find somebody, it's, and I don't think he was marrying uggos. Okay. I don't think he was marrying a bunch of senior citizen ladies like, you got to be married before you die. I'll take on that 80-year-old widow. Like, so once I kind of looked at that, I was like, And so in terms of Hear Him, and I would ask God about stuff like that, I'm like, if God is okay with that, then I don't think I'm okay with that God. The main one probably for me was, I did not know until 2020 that Black members of the church, or as they put it, members of African descent, were not allowed to attend the temple, which Mormons believe is an essential ordinance, just like baptism. Like you have to be baptized It's a covenant you have to make with God. Even Jesus was baptized. So everyone's got to be baptized. And so to exclude a group because of their race from an actual saving ordinance, as it's called, is not something I believe God would ever do. And if he did, then God is racist. And if he didn't, then the church should apologize for it and say, hey, our bad, that was wrong. And we should have never done that. But neither one of those things ever happened. And so those were kinds of things that, as they call in the ex-Mormon community, broke my shelf. So when you find something that you don't like, and you put it on the shelf. And then another thing you put, and eventually the shelf is so heavy laden that it tips and you can never come.
I like that a lot better than breaking a camel. It broke your shelf. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you for sharing all of that. In answer to my question about how many laughs per minute a special should have in order to be a comedy special.
I do what I can to derail the conversation and make it about me and about Mormonism.
No, I love it.
Every conversation and make it a gospel discussion.
Well, here's one of the other questions that you asked that I do think this is more aligned with what we have been talking about. Actually, literally, here's a series of questions. One is, how long do you try a bit before shelving it? We were just talking about shelves. And then, what helps you decide what to keep and what to set aside? That's something that I think about a lot and have a lot to say about. And then, do you have any tricks for memorization or going up without a set list? How do you come up with your material? How do you test out new material? I really like the question, what helps you decide what to keep and what to set aside? And like for me, I am in a way an idea hoarder, right? Like I have a digital recorder, at the ready at all times. If I think something could be funny, fun, interesting, meaningful, a song lyric, a note for my journal, an insight for my life, like I will often, unless there are many situations where I won't just stop. Like I won't usually stop meditating. If I'm meditating, then I'm like, I gotta capture this brilliant joke about meditation. Like part of my journey has been about getting comfortable with letting go and knowing like other ideas will come, or if there was an idea that I thought was so good, then maybe I would stop meditating for a moment and be like, I'll forgive myself for this, or, the God of meditation, or whatever it might be. Like it's important for us to listen to ourselves and for us to listen to others who are voicing things that are meaningful, though everything is coming through our filter, be it the voice of God, be it, the voice of your community. Or your own, whatever it is, like it's arising in our individual consciousness. And one time when I was doing an ayahuasca ceremony, someone asked the guide, do you recommend writing things down during the ceremony? And I know people who do bring notebooks and like fill them. I have at times brought a notebook. Usually I will now, if I do one, or historically I came to a place where afterwards, like when I was like back, like when it had ended and like sort of the dream was coming back to a waking state, like, which was kind of what it's like. It was like recording things from like in a dream journal. Be like, oh, there was that and there was this and there was this. The guide said he did not recommend writing things down during and or even necessarily after, because he said the things that were the noteworthy things for you to remember, you will remember those. The experiences that
like trusting the abundance of it or the importance of it, that the important things are going to come back to you because
yes, even more the important than the abundance. I mean, like there is abundance, like there are things to notice outside and inside all of the time. But so that's to answer the question of like, how do I decide what to keep, or how do you come up with material, or how do you write or decide what the process begins with? Like, what do you notice? What do you notice? And in the words of Verlin Klinkenborg, who wrote several short sentences about writing, which is a book I really love, one of the things he pointed out, and others have pointed out as well, is that like part of writing or making art of any kind is first noticing, and then noticing that you noticed. And so what are the things that you notice? What are the things that you noticed that you noticed? And then, on top of that, what is, are they important? Are they meaningful to you? Are they meaningful, to what you want to express?
Mm.
My friend Liz Glazer just shared with me from a book she has read. I forget the name of the book or the author, but it's from, like, she said, the 50s, and it's like a motivational book about maybe public speaking, or at least this part. It said, when you're speaking, like, the two things that you want are to know what you want to say, or know what you have to say, and then to have a burning passion to say it. So for me, the things that I choose to continue to work on are things that come up because they're meaningful, or whence they come up. I'm like, oh yes, of course. Like, I love talking about my grandmother, who died a few years ago, because she was funny, and I love her, and I love, keeping her memory alive, and keeping. I think, they say in Judaism sometimes when a person dies, may her memory be a blessing. And my grandmother always wanted to make sure that I was, making a living. So for me, I'm like, also, may her memory be a lucrative financial opportunity. And
So
and
she's
so I love,
giving back.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love talking about my mom and my relationship with my mom. I love talking about my girlfriend and my relationship, with, about that partnership that I obviously created a whole show about with her. And so, like, that's how to know, for me, and how I would recommend anybody know, like, how do you decide what to keep? Like, the things that, if you stopped saying them or stopped exploring them, you would be missing, things that
Mhm.
are core and key. Like, and again, like, I also saw Josh Glantz, the clown you saw and mentioned, when I was there last year, and I thought it was so funny. And I honestly hardly remember anything that he did, except that I was laughing the whole time. And that's beautiful. And like, some comedy only exists in a moment, and we don't have to remember it later. And some comedy and art and writing will stay with us. And for our own sake, I mean, you get to decide. Like, it seems like you have decided that, at least for the shows you've created so far, and the show you're imagining creating for next year, like, that this is a deep mine, a rich vein of topic for you, because of how meaningful it is to you. And also, I mean, because that's there, I think it's very wise for you to also, like, follow, see how silly you can get, because you value that, you also respect that, and it's probably good to temper, you know, the soapbox with silliness.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you talk about what to include and what you don't. I had a conversation with Adam Bloom about this. His book, Finding Your Comic Genius, there's a chapter on persona, and essentially boiling your persona down to three basic things, like two main ones and an alternative third. And so there was a joke, a thought that came to me, and I thought it was funny, and I thought I was going to try it out, and I talked to him about it, and he's like, "But does that fit your persona? Does that fit your, you know, what you've already established? Because if not, then it's working against you." It was a gun joke, and he's like, "Do you want to be reminding people about guns? Is that your like?" He's just very good at kind of boiling people down to a few elements, and he acknowledges that that can change over your comedy, but that it can kind of be confusing to people, almost like if you came on stage and you had a German accent and you spoke in that for 5 minutes, and then you switched and you started speaking with an Italian accent, that people would be like, "Wait, I thought this guy was German." And so, in terms of having like a clear voice, it's hard, because my reaction would be, well, if you know who you are, then everything that you say is going to be in your voice, like we talked about earlier, like Jimmy Carr saying that comedians leak. Like, even if you're talking about pickles, who you are as a person is going to come out in that. even though it's not a joke about pickles, it's a joke about you, kind of thing. However, we contain multitudes. And so the joke about sexual assault that we've talked about before, that was a real thought that I've had. And you'll hear that in comedy, that you say your secrets, you say oh, this crazy thought came to you, you should share it on stage because it shows who you are. And it's like, I guess there's differing opinions. There's some people that like, oh, it's a funny thought that I had, I'm going to share it, no problem. But then Adam Bloom is like, yeah, but does it fit your the persona that you've already had?
That it's so interesting. I mean, because I've read some of the book that you lent me or gifted me, and I like what I've read, and I think it's a great perspective. And I think it's important when he's asking you that question, like what your answer is. And like when, I mean, because it sounds like when he's saying, do you really want to remind people about guns? I'm like, why isn't the answer yes? Because when you're talking about, if you're talking about the Mormon church and the ways in which like people wouldn't mask, and not all Mormons, not all people, but like that's about public health and safety, and guns are about public health and safety. So I mean, I would say, and perhaps I don't mean to be just contrarian, I'm no anti Adam Bloom head. Like, I think he offers valuable questions, and also I'm much more on the side of like if you think it's part of who you are. If you come up with it, like if you decide for yourself or with his guidance or his help, you're like, oh yeah, I really don't want to do that. Like, then sure, you deciding it is absolutely fine. You can decide it. You can be like, Adam Bloom is my boss, I do what he says. And that's, if you decide that Adam Bloom's your boss and you do what he says, absolutely. Don't do what I say. But, and like to the point of like, I understand that it's an analogy and it's not a perfect one-to-one parallel, but like if somebody came out and just started speaking in a German accent and then switched every 5 minutes to a different accent, that could be very funny. I mean, like, I understand what you're like. Rory Scovel does it. Sometimes he comes out, does a whole show in a Southern accent, sometimes no accent, sometimes part German, part Southern, part normal. And like, that's a part of it. And of course, I understand he is not saying nobody can do that and people should obviously do what they want. But like, what is Carlin's persona? Even in his like fullest, richest, most experienced form, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into comedy. Like, I feel like every special he was doing some stuff that was wordplay, some stuff that was like fart jokes, and some stuff that was like, searing indictments of like the military industrial complex and the government. And like, I think that those things, like, I actually don't even know when people revere Carlin, like, are they revering all of those things? Like, because when I watch his specials, like every part of every joke of every 90-minute special doesn't, get me exactly the same way. Like, I love so many of the things that he has said and done. And some of them are more, poetry or political rants than, set up punchline jokes with a laugh per minute, of any kind. And so, like, who is he? He does contain multitudes, as you've already, we all do contain these multitudes. And I think I'm not as concerned that an audience is going to be confused. And maybe I'm speaking for myself, who like, I don't even know if it's that important to prescriptively determine what your persona is. I think it could be valuable. Like, once you've been doing comedy for some number of years, a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, look back at the work that you have created and be like, are there patterns? Like, descriptively be like, oh, it looks like I talk about this a lot. I care about this. That aligns with my vision of myself as a human and an artist and a comedian. And then if you think something that doesn't go along with it, does that mean that you're not that, or you're not those, or that, you are more expansive than your first couple years? Imagine, I mean, it feels like he's helping people walk, you know? And eventually you're going to be able to run and fly and invent new modes of transportation. And so maybe he's coming from a starting helping people begin to be like one at a time, one thing at a
I
time.
mean, what one of the things that just came to my mind, and I don't remember who the comedian was, but he was in the middle of a set and there was like a moth that flew on the stage and he stomped on it and it just like killed the energy because he, I
Because
think,
it killed them off. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and he's like a gentle, like if Bill Burr stepped on a moth or TJ Miller, I don't think it would have been as jarring because they already seem to have kind of a lot of physicality and anger that it would fit within who you think they are.
For
Um,
sure. I
but
think
I think he was just kind of an innocent one-liner comedian making lighthearted jokes about sewing and gas stations and stuff. And so it was like, ugh.
oh yeah. And so I see that is a fine analogy to like if you're doing all lighthearted stuff and then you introduce a joke about guns, absolutely. That could be incongruous, it could be jarring, and that could be your desire, you know, if you want it to be. Like I think to do these things mindfully, like whenever we bring up topics that could like make people feel sadness or fear in addition to the joy that we hope that they experience at, you know, receiving our comedy. Or I mean, obviously there's all kinds of art that is intended to make people uncomfortable or scared, uh and then hopefully, you know, with some benefit to it as well. I mean, unless some people love being uncomfortable and scared. But
True crime.
certainly for comedy, yeah, I definitely, I think eventually, well, like certainly when you're putting on a show, a curated show that is written and honed and that is not like a Rory Scovel improv stand-up type show.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking about what you're going to put in the show in advance, absolutely it pays to ask the question of like what goes with other stuff in what way in the show, and what goes with both who I am and who I am, you know, striving to be on stage and in my life. I think those are great questions to ask, and I'm glad that Adam Bloom helps you do that. I think that I guess I bristle slightly at the idea that our persona ought the shouldness of it. And I understand it's voluntary, but the
Mm-hmm.
idea is like you pick two things. You pick two things, you can have a spare third thing. Uh two multitudes per person, just a bitude, you know? Which of course, I'm sure if I were in a conversation with him, like he would not be like concrete. Yes, no one may
I would
have
actually
more
love for
than
you to have
two.
a conversation with Adam Bloom. We had a
Sure,
we had a 30-minute back and forth whether or not Conan O'Brien was witty.
that's really interesting. Who was one of you on one side and
So
one on
I
the
I
other?
was on I was in Club Wit, and I forgive me, Adam, if I'm misrepresenting your view, your side of the argument, but that essentially what Conan O'Brien offered on his late night show was lateral comments that someone, and again, forgive me, Adam, if you see this, I don't remember the comedian. It was a British comedian, very well respected, very intelligent comedian who came on, told a joke about something, and then Conan O'Brien made a comment that basically was the same thing. You know, it's like, oh, this is a tissue, and then his comment was like, yeah, Kleenex. And it's like, yeah, that's what I just said. It was, that's not the comment, but that's the same kind of lateral rather than something that upped the joke or was an additional tag. It was just redundant. And I recognize that when especially you are making television and there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, that your hands are creatively tied. And I encouraged him to listen to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend podcast, because I think if you listen to that, you will see that he's very witty and that he does continually add to it. And I think a lot of the benign comments that he may or may not make or have made in his late night days have to do with director's decisions, people running it, editing, things like that. That maybe there were funny things he was adding on, but they cut them for time, or we want this person to shine, and we think that the thing that you added maybe brought them down a peg. But if you listen to his podcast, I do think Conan O'Brien is witty, and I stand by that.
Fair. I'll also add, like, you and Adam Bloom may have different ideas and connotations of what wit is and what it means to be witty. Like, because sometimes there are comedians who, like, if somebody's like, that was witty, that was clever, like, that could be like minimizing and a put down. And like, that there are comedians who are like, I think that Conan O'Brien is, in my definition, capable of wit. I think he often goes bigger and broader and more absurd and ridiculous. And I wouldn't assess that most of the things that he does are at their core, like, wit is not like the main tool in his toolbox for, I mean, he has just an extensive toolbox of comedy, and I think wit is in there, and he uses it when he wants to or when it comes up. And also there's so much more, like, you know, if you were to say, like, who's wittier, Stephen Wright or Conan O'Brien, like, you don't it's not a competition. They're both unique, brilliant talents of their own kind. But if I had to assign one of them as the witty one and the other one as not the witty one, I would say Stephen Wright is, like, just structurally speaking, the things that he's saying are more like in the form and function of what I know as wit. And I'm not here to just come on and be like, Adam Bloom is right about everything. But no, I mean, I agree with you. I just think, I mean, Conan is Conan. And at a certain point, I mean, analysis can be fun. And also, and so I'm sure you had a wonderful discussion of it. I do think that in a debate, even like a fun debate, like, one of the most important things is to define one's terms. Like, what does wit mean to you? Like, what is the definition you're working with? What is the definition he's working with? And what do you both think about it? Like, is it an agreed upon good? Is it, you know, a part of a larger whole? Is it, you know, is it separate from, what is it separate from? So yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, Adam Bloom is one of the most passionate and opinionated comedic minds I've ever met. And if you can have him on the podcast, he's fantastic in terms
challenge accepted.
Yeah,
both to have him on the podcast,
getting to the bottom of things. I mean, to the point where it's fun. Like, that's one thing I've really appreciated is that as Mormons, you're taught to avoid contention, which means there's not a lot of criticism. And I know in Jewish culture, like with like the midrash, and there's other things where you're kind of like encouraged to critically think and break things down. And
can't spell contention without content.
Oh, yes, true.
That's what we Jews say starting now. Yeah.
Or shun,
yes.
Which you will be if you offer a dissenting voice. So it's very fun to have these kind of sparring sessions with Adam, because I've been taught not to argue but actually, and he does it in a lighthearted way. I mean, you just won't find someone else that digs in as deep and will have his sources at the ready. Yeah, I think he'll be a great Faucet.
Fair point. I will aim to first potentially have him on Broccoli and Ice Cream, and so I can get to know who he is, and then
also
dig in.
Jewish.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that checks out. So we've been talking for a little over an hour now. Are there any specific things that you wanted to talk about today or ask about that we didn't cover, or anything further still lingering from any of the topics that did arise?
Sure. Do you have any regrets and or tips or insights from doing Fringe last year with the venue you chose, the topics that you chose to talk about, how you chose to spend your time while you were there. Is there anything that you would tell me or any other fringe hopeful going into preparing an hour?
Thank you for asking a generous question. I mean, the 2 times that I've gone, I'd say the main, not regret, but one of the main like challenges of it is financial. Like most people who go, I've heard quotes that like there's thousands of shows every day, and that the average audience size is like 4 or 6 because so many rooms are small and empty. And while there are hundreds of people going to some shows, there are often, on a Monday, Tuesday night, for example, there are emptier rooms than others. And so definitely I'm happy with the investment of time and money that that I and others put into my going there. I definitely came out without as much money as I went in with both times. Not by I mean, perhaps by shocking amounts compared to like normally in a month of doing comedy, if I do 25 shows, I try to make money. But the main one of the main benefits both times is that, I mean, the boot camp aspect of it really, like, I went with shows both times that were, I thought, as done as possible, and then they got even dunner when I was there. And
Done and
some
Dunner.
done and dunner, love it. um and then after I went in 2018 in August, I recorded my next album of that hour in like May of 2019, I think April or May, I think May.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went last August, I filmed that hour just a few weeks ago, this August. And so I'm super, like, I love Edinburgh. And certainly if money were no object, I would go all of the time. And I would recommend anyone for whom money is no object to go all of the time. And those for whom money is an object, be aware that money is the object that it is. Both of the times that I went, I was in large, like, produced venues, so not part of the free fringe. If I go in the future, I might see what the free fringe can do for me in the way of that particular issue. I know it will come also with other responsibilities, like, promoting and filling the room on my own without a team of people that are being paid to do it by some higher structural system. But like, artistically, it is a beautiful, magical summer camp full of clowns, full of stories, full of music and art and dance and comedy. And I went to see 60 shows outside of the ones that I performed on. I performed on many shows a week that weren't just the hour I was doing every day as well. It's there's beautiful castles. There's a nice little mountain to hike. That's easy for somebody who doesn't usually hike up mountains. You can do it in like a half hour. But as far as like the preparing, I guess if you want to do it, if you've never done it, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to get out of it? What would your ideal be? I mean, just listen to the stories of lots of people who have gone. There's amazing, hilarious, brilliant, talented comedians who have had bad times there, like who just didn't get into it, or the audiences didn't show up, or the burnout, the grind. For me, this one particular this last year when I was there was one show that had a gigantic audience, and I felt I did not put on my best performance. And I talked about it with Renee, my beloved partner in life and creation of that particular show, and had she helped me have an epiphany. Like, she's like, here, have this epiphany that has served me as much as possible certainly in every show for the rest of the run, and now in my memory for the rest of my life. I don't have to, I did write it down, and it's not like, it's not a profound thing, but it's something that I didn't do that night, which was just really perform the show to the best of my ability, regardless of what the response was or what I perceived the response to be, because I am an ingredient of how the show goes. It isn't merely that the audience is loud or quiet or good or bad. They are a bunch of people coming together, reacting to me. And yes, there will be some audiences that even if I sweat through my shirt every show for the following week or so of the run after that one.
And do
Like
you mean literally or metaphorically? I mean,
literally, yeah, 100% and metaphorically.
That would be my suggestion. Wear something that hides sweat.
Put pads, menstrual pads, in your armpits. That is what I did.
Did you really?
For my taping? Yes.
Wow.
So yeah, that is that if, especially if you are somebody, you know, depending on the room, depending on the air conditioning, depending on how much you move around, how physical you are. But yeah, that, I guess, know that, like, obviously if you come from a different country, and you're going to the UK, if you're going to Scotland, like, there are different cultural reference points. There are different, I talked to a British comedian who lives in America who has performed at the Fringe many times, and he talked about the dynamic that in the UK, he says, as a general rule, they don't like people to be like too up on themselves, too confident, to, like, you know, kind of the tall poppy syndrome that I think exists maybe in Australia more.
Half my show.
And
Brits aren't allowed to believe in themselves. And
so that doesn't mean that if you do believe in yourself and you're coming from a different culture where that is encouraged, you know, a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, American dream success story. But just, you know, there are things to be aware of. And I feel like there's things to be aware of in advance. And then there are things that you can, even the most you learn about it, you can learn everything about it, and you never, like, you have to just do it. If you think you want to do it, research it, and then at a certain point, stop researching it. And if you can do it and you want to do it, even if you don't know everything, even if there are uncertainties, even if there are fears, do it, and you will learn those things. And the same is true just for creating an hour of comedy in general. Like, don't spend all of your time reading and listening to podcasts and learning so much that it cuts into the time that you have to do it. Like, doing it is the most important thing. And sometimes even starting doing stand-up or doing any kind of art without any training can be like the most, like, freeing way to discover who you actually are, and then learn later, be like, oh, people don't do that? Like, great, well, I do that, or now I do some version, some combination. Like, as long as the thing's not like, oh, other people don't tell other people's jokes. Oh, well, I do that. I tell everybody else's jokes and not my own. But other than that, you know, like, there's clearly some basics, like, if they give you 5 minutes, do 5 minutes, you know, or for the most part, usually move the microphone stand out of the way, or don't wear shorts, but you can leave the mic stand wherever you want. You can wear shorts if you want. You can wear whatever you want. You can go over your time if you want. You just might not be invited back. And, you know, if you steal other people's jokes and do them as your own, then at a certain point, there might be consequences for that as well. So I wouldn't recommend it. But in general, like, yeah, figure out, you could try to, you know, before you get started, prescribe, you can prescribe who you think you are, who you think you'll be, who you want to be. And then in the course of doing it, make sure to look back at what you are doing and discover and describe who you actually are. And perhaps then there can be some, you know, humor in the discrepancy between who you thought you were, who you wanted to be, and what you find is actually the case. I just read also in The Creative Act by Rick Rubin a line that said something like, let's see, I think I actually took a note about it right here. And it is, yes. Yes, on page 130. In terms of priority, inspiration comes first. You come next. The audience comes last.
Hmm.
And so
That's great.
definitely, yeah. And so I feel like even he wasn't speaking directly to like the point we were discussing about persona and Adam Bloom, but like inspiration comes first. You come next. Then you can then shape the inspiration and be like, what do I want to do with all this stuff that came to me when I was inspired? How do I want to use it? Who am I with respect to it? Then you shape it, and then you bring it to the audience.
See, it's one of those things where you say kind of like being yourself, and if it's you, and kind of um, you said something to the extent of like of being yourself at Edinburgh, or if that makes sense. This is one of my pet peeves is at shows where they go, the next comedian knows who she is. And I'm like, no, I don't. It's so much easier said than done, at least for me. And maybe that's because I'm going through a shakeup right now. But I feel like that's so much harder. Like they're like, yeah, because you know who you are and you know who, and it's like, I
I
don't.
mean,
I wasn't really, I felt like I wasn't I felt like I was part of this community that said, this is who you are. And I went, great, that's who I am. And so I don't know how many other people feel that way. And maybe that's kind of a blessing of not being part of a community that has a lot of things. But I don't know. Do you feel like people know who they are when they get up there? I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things is to be your genuine, real self and to not think, oh, they're going to laugh, they're going to like this. And that kind of comes in with the persona thing of me going, they're going to laugh at this, and Adam Bloom saying, yeah, but is that you? And I'm like, I don't know who I am, so right now I'm just going off of what is going to make people laugh.
So what I say to that is two things. Number one, knowing who you are and being who you are different.
Mm.
Like to know who you are on stage, like in the moment, like it's actually like Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning author of Thinking Fast and Slow. Sorry, I was thinking a little slow. Uh, he coined the terms or like discussed the concepts of like the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Hmm.
Like the remembering self is the one who can know who one was moments ago, or like look at the map of who one's been throughout, you know, the past year, the past life. But the experience and the experiencing self is the one doing the thing. And then the remembering self looks back at the various, you know, actions of or the memories of having been those different experiencing selves. So if
Hmm.
I were to say, with respect, I hear you saying that you don't know exactly who you are because for decades you were told how to be and you agreed because that's what they said to do and you weren't listening to yourself.
Yeah, like all my shows have been basically coming of age shows.
And so if you do that, imagine you do that your whole life. Every year you have a new coming of age show. Oh, that's who she is. She's the coming of age comedian. She's the coming of age person. But like my sincere like advice to you and anyone is to, especially for the past 4 years since you have been living according to, you know,
That
the
dictates.
voice of God as spoken directly to you and not through others or your own inner voice. Look back at those and say, when have I felt the most myself? When have I felt the most comfortable? When have I felt the most way I want to feel, both in my life and on stage? Like, what are the things that don't think about a persona
Mhm.
necessarily? Just think about your ideal self, your highest calling self, like yourself at your best, whatever that is. Like there are moments, I bet, in the past years, in the past 4 years, let's say even, where you've had an interaction with your husband or your kids or a time on stage or with a friend or in conversation with me or on a podcast, or there have been times when your experiencing self experienced something, said something, did something that later you could look back on, now you could look back on and be like, yes, that. I want more of that. Even a joke that you've written or a riff that you riffed that you're like, that in that moment, I was doing exactly, if I could have that, a thing like that moment happen again.
Turn back time.
No, but not turn back time. If I could turn forward time and recreate that kind of thing, if I can make the beautiful momentary thing that was what I wanted it to be after the fact, if I could will that into existence, like what were the ingredients that went into that moment, that went into that joke, that went into that experience? Like, what did I do? What did I do, or how was I open? How did I show up for that to happen? And that is what I'm saying you can do to become more the experiencing self you want to be in the future. By being the remembering self, by looking back. You may not know, you may think you don't know who you are right now, but you can look back at who you've been and think, what was the best version of that I would will myself to be again in some form, or do it the other way. I mean, I think that's what you did when you look back. You can like learn from the negative as well. You looked back at who you were and what you were doing for years, just obliging the terms of Mormonism. And you're like, I'm not going to do that because I know I don't want to do that. So that's something that you do know about yourself, is that you don't want to do that. And so, like the way that a lot of people might be like, I don't think it's necessary. For me, it's not useful to think like, oh, do you have a type in romance? But a not type can be helpful to be like, oh yeah, I don't want to be with a person like this or like that or like this or like that. And there are versions of that for yourself. You might not know exactly who you are, but I think you know a lot of ways that you're not.
I think actually some of like what you're saying is why I so appreciated seeing more shows, because when you see someone else who's done it so much that they're in that flow state and you're experiencing it, that even though you can't articulate it, and that's kind of the thing back to Josh Glantz, was like you couldn't remember what the jokes were in the show, but you remembered you laughing, you remembered that feeling. And so rather than just saying, I'm going to do what they do in copying, like you're talking about telling people's jokes, but I'm going to create this kind of presence that I'm feeling right now where it doesn't feel put on. And I, from our last conversation that we had on this podcast about, I think you mentioned it, about Rory Scovel, and seeing him, that you were at a comedy festival and you were doing, I think you said you were doing the same set in this competition. And then you saw Rory go up and you were like, oh, you can do that. And it's not that you're like, oh, I'm going to do that too, but you're like, oh, the world is open to me to do things a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I want to create whatever this kind of feeling, like Pete Holmes talks about, that we've never been an audience before, that it's almost this religious experience where you have people breathing together, laughing, you know, that their attention is all focused on the same. But there's, I think why I'm so fascinated by clowning is because there seems to be a total surrender and acceptance to making everyone part of the experience, whereas stand-up is usually quite contrived, or there's a feeling that you're in control as the comic and you're flying the plane and you've got to be the confident one that moves from this to that. And I guess I'm hoping for a generosity that I saw like in Josh's show, a willingness to give the audience some power, because you're totally confident in whatever your voice is or whatever the direction is, that you know you're going to be able to handle anything.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Here's two things I'll say. One, the second thing, I'm gonna share some rules of clowning that a clown friend of mine shared with me.
Yay.
And the first thing though is I'll say it's like the Maya Angelou quote. You know, people will not remember what you did or what you said; they will only remember how Josh Glantz made you feel.
That's right. Choose a big Glantz head.
Yeah, big Glantz head. So my friend Grayson Morris, who I've had on my podcast, Broccoli and Ice Cream, she's a fantastic stand-up comedian, clown, performance artist of many kinds. And I asked her, she had mentioned once that she mentioned these principles of clowning. And I asked, is there somewhere someone could learn more about them? And she said, this inspired me to want to read about principles of clowning, and a Google search provided me some interesting and diverse answers. She says, yes, I think like any art form, to understand it, you must go to school for it, and no list of principles will suffice. But since I sometimes teach clown and I'm developing my own pedagogy, here's my list just for fun. So I'll also just say real quick, something that you said earlier, Leah, you said, I'm, in ways trying to get out of my own head. And like, obviously the head is part of the body, but the mind isn't necessarily part of the body. And I have historically, similarly, perhaps been more of a mind guy than a body guy. But the body is an important part of things, and clowning is very much about the body.
Okay.
So I think that you're, to take, if you're moved to take a clowning class, I think that would work. Grayson lives in LA. I would recommend you taking her class if you could, but you don't live there. But here are Grayson's principles she shared. She said, number 1, the clown lives to have fun, and the clown lives to please the audience. If the clown's fun displeases the audience, the clown is sorry. Number 2, the clown relishes in their body and what it can do, especially what it can do that pleases the audience. 3, the clown is always real, open, present with, and vulnerable to the audience and the audience's feelings. 4, the clown offers energy and fun for the audience to enjoy. The clown is additionally energized by the audience when they like the clown. My clownish girlfriend is listening nearby and just energized me and became energized by my joy.
Yeah.
Number 5, the clown has high hopes that they can do something that might be interesting or bring them some status or please the audience. They make promises beyond their abilities and take risks in their endless desire to please the audience. When they inevitably fail, they admit it and are truly sorry. And number 6, the clown knows how to make an entrance for the audience and how to make an exit for the audience. And then she talks about, that's all called the red nose clown, the cute little dum-dum. But there are other ways of being dumb. Like she says, Eric Andre and Sacha Baron Cohen and Amy Sedaris are bouffons, or I guess similar to buffoons. The other kind of dum-dum, a freak who makes you think. And then there are, she says, Zen monks who've used absurdity to teach their pupils existential principles. And throughout history, and all over the world, there are concepts of the fool or the wise fool or the trickster, the jester, so silly and harmless that only he is allowed, or only they are allowed, to whisper into the king's ear. So I think that those are really valuable for stand-up comedians to think about as well. And of course, there's many ways to be a stand-up comedian, as there are many ways to be a clown, as there are many ways to be a human. But I think a lot of those principles speak to some of the things that, speak to you in your desires to care for the audience, to care for your husband, to care for your community, to care for friends, to care for yourself, to care for everyone, and to take risks. And, if you hurt someone's feelings, apologize, but to, be true to yourself, to be who you are and be in who you are. So those are some clown principles.
I love those. And I will listen back to this podcast to take notes unless there is, unless you can put a link to it in the show notes for people. I can certainly email you those clown principles, and I'll consider putting them in the show notes as well. That should probably be easy. Sorry, I'm not trying to make extra work for you.
Oh,
well, pencil's better than a sharp
too
mind.
Bad you did make extra work for me, so you must apologize.
I'm so sorry.
Well, splits. Leah, before we conclude, I'm going to briefly read from the Creator Accountability Network again. Reiterating, this content is CAN credentialed, which means you can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm on their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. And before we go, is there anything else, anything that you'd like to plug or let people know about, or your social media, your websites, or any final thoughts that you would like to share?
I am at Leah Renee Comedian, and this show that I've been talking about, I will be doing a lot of previews in the spring. So hopefully, if anyone is around New York or Philly, that's probably where I'll be doing most of them. So you can see if I fail spectacularly, I will apologize to you mid-show, because if there's one thing I know how to do as a woman raised in the Mormon Church, it's to apologize for my existence.
That is very funny. Man, I bet that there's probably some middle path of apologizing that could be an ideal place to shoot for. Well, Leah, thank you for being my friend. Thank you for coming on
Thank
the
you.
show and sharing. As always, it was a great pleasure and honor.
Thank you, Mike. Likewise, ditto.